Chapter 35. Hobby Shop. On the way back to the hotel, I caught sight of Jack's hobby shop, the place where Franklin Honecker had worked. I told the cab driver to stop and wait. I went in and found Jack himself presiding over his teeny-weeny fire engines, railroad trains, and airplanes, boats, houses, lampposts, trees, tanks, rockets, automobiles, porters, conductors, policemen, firemen, mommies, daddies, cats, dogs, chickens, soldiers, ducks, and cows. He was a cadaverous man, a serious man, a dirty man, and he coughed a lot. What kind of boy was Franklin Honecker? He echoed, and he coughed and coughed. He shook his head, and he showed that he adored Frank as much as he'd ever adored anybody. That isn't a question I have to answer with words. I can show you what kind of a boy Franklin Honecker was. He coughed. You can look, he said, and you can judge for yourself. And he took me down into the basement of his store. He lived down there. There was a double bed and a dresser and a hot plate. Jack apologized for the unmade bed. My wife left me a week ago. He coughed. I'm still trying to pull the strings of my life back together. And then he turned on a switch, and the far end of the basement was filled with a blinding light. We approached the light and found that it was sunshine to a fantastic little country built on plywood, an island as perfectly rectangular as a township in Kansas. Any restless soul, any soul seeking to find what lay beyond its green boundaries, really would fall off the edge of the world. The details were so exquisitely in scale, so cunningly textured and tinted, that it was unnecessary for me to squint in order to believe that the nation was real. The hills, the lakes, the rivers, the forests, the towns, and all else that good natives everywhere hold so dear. And everywhere ran a spaghetti pattern of railroad tracks. Look at the doors of the houses, said Jack reverently. Neat. Keen. They've got real knobs on them, and the knockers really work. God. You asked what kind of a boy Franklin Honecker was? He built this. Jack choked up. All by himself? Oh, I helped some, but anything I did was according to his plans. That kid was a genius. How could anybody argue with you? His kid brother was a midget, you know. I know. He did some of the soldering underneath. It sure looks real. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't done overnight, either. Rome wasn't built in a day. That kid didn't have any home life, you know. I've heard. This was his real home. Thousands of hours he spent down here. Sometimes he wouldn't even run the trains. Just sit and look, the way we're doing. There's a lot to see. It's practically like a trip to Europe. There are so many things to see if you look close. He'd see things you and I wouldn't see. He'd all of a sudden tear down a hill that would look just as real as any hill you ever saw, to you and me. And he'd be right, too. He'd put a lake where that hill had been, and a trestle over the lake, and it would look 10 times as good as it did before. It isn't a talent everybody has. That's right, Jack said passionately. The passion cost him another coughing fit. When the fit was over, his eyes were watering copiously. "Listen, I told that kid he should go to college and study some engineering so he could go to work for American Flyer or somebody like that. Somebody big. Somebody who'd really back all the ideas he had." "Looks to me as if you backed him a good deal." "Wish I had. Wish I could have," mourned Jack. "I didn't have the capital. I gave him whatever I could, but most of this stuff he bought out of what he earned, working upstairs for me. He didn't spend a dime on anything but this. Didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't go to movies, didn't go out with girls, wasn't car crazy. This country could certainly use a few more of those." Jack shrugged. "Well, I guess the Florida gangsters got him. After he'd talk." "Guess they did." Jack suddenly broke down and cried. "I wonder if those dirty sons of bitches," he sobbed, "have any idea what it was they killed." Chapter 36. Meow. During my trip to Ilium and to points beyond, a 2-week expedition bridging Christmas, I let a poor poet named Sherman Krabs have my New York City apartment free. My second wife had left me on the grounds that it was too pessimistic for an optimist to live with. Krabs was a bearded man, a platinum blonde Jesus with spaniel eyes. He was no close friend of mine. I had met him at a cocktail party where he presented himself as national chairman of poets and painters for immediate nuclear war. He begged for shelter, not necessarily bomb-proof, and it happened that I had some. When I returned to my apartment, still twanging with the puzzling spiritual implications of the unclaimed stone angel in Ilium, I found my apartment wrecked by a nihilistic debauch. Krabs was gone, but before leaving, he had run up $300 worth of long-distance calls, set my couch on fire in 5 places, killed my cat in my avocado tree, and torn the door off my medicine cabinet. He wrote this poem at what proved to be excrement on the yellow linoleum floor of my kitchen. I have a kitchen, but it is not a complete kitchen. I will not be truly gay until I have a dispose-all. There was another message, written in lipstick in a feminine hand, on the wallpaper over my bed. It said, "No, no, no," said Chicken Lickin'. There was a sign hung around my dead cat's neck. It said, "Meow." I have not seen Krebs since. Nonetheless, I sensed that he was my Karas. If he was, he served it as a rang-rang. A rang-rang, according to Bokanon, is a person who steers people away from a line of speculation by reducing that line, with the example of the rang-rang's own life, to an absurdity. I might have been vaguely inclined to dismiss the Stone Angel as meaningless, and to go from there to the meaninglessness of all. But after I saw what Krebs had done, in particular what he had done to my sweet cat, nihilism was not for me. Somebody or something did not wish for me to be a nihilist. It was Krebs's mission, whether he knew it or not, to disenchant me with that philosophy. Well done, Krebs. Well done. Chapter 37. A Modern Major General. And then, one day, one Sunday, I found out where the fugitive from justice, the model maker, the great God, Jehovah, and Beelzebub of bugs and mason jars was. Franklin Honecker could be found. He was alive. The news was in a special supplement to the New York Sunday Times. The supplement was a paid ad for a Banana Republic. On its cover was the profile of the most heartbreakingly beautiful girl I ever hoped to see. Beyond the girl, bulldozers were knocking down palm trees, making a broad avenue. At the end of the avenue were the steel skeletons of 3 new buildings. "The Republic of San Lorenzo," said the copy on the cover. "On the move. A healthy, happy, progressive, freedom-loving, beautiful nation makes itself extremely attractive to American investors and tourists alike." I was in no hurry to read the contents. The girl on the cover was enough for me. More than enough, since I had fallen in love with her on sight. She was very young and very grave, too, and luminously compassionate and wise. She was as brown as chocolate. Her hair was like golden flax. Her name was Mona Amons Manzano. The cover said she was the adopted daughter of the dictator of the island. I opened the supplement, hoping for more pictures of this sublime mongrel, Madonna. I found instead a portrait of the island's dictator, Miguel Papa Manzano, a gorilla in his late 70s. Next to Papa's portrait was a picture of a narrow-shouldered, fox-faced, and mature young man. He wore a snow-white military blouse with some sort of jeweled sunburst hanging on it. His eyes were close together. They had circles under them. He had apparently told barbers all his life to shave the sides and back of his head, but to leave the top of his hair alone. He had a wiry pompadour, a sort of cube of hair, marcelled, that arose to an incredible height. This unattractive child was identified as Major General Franklin Honecker, Minister of Science and Progress in the Republic of San Lorenzo. He was 26 years old. Chapter 38. Barracuda Capital of the World. San Lorenzo was 50 miles long and 20 miles wide. I learned from the supplement to the New York Sunday Times. Its population was 450,000 souls, all fiercely dedicated to the ideals of the free world. Its highest point, Mount McCabe, was 11,000 feet above sea level. Its capital was Bolivar, a strikingly modern city built on a harbor capable of sheltering the entire United States Navy. The principal exports were sugar, coffee, bananas, indigo, and handcrafted novelties. And sports fishermen recognize San Lorenzo as the unchallenged barracuda capital of the world. I wondered how Franklin Honecker, who had never even finished high school, had got himself such a fancy job. I found a partial answer in an essay on San Lorenzo that was signed by Papa Manzano. Papa said that Frank was the architect of the San Lorenzo Master Plan, which included new roads, rural electrification, sewage disposal plants, hotels, hospitals, clinics, railroads, the works. And though the essay was brief and tightly edited, Papa referred to Frank 5 times as the blood son of Dr. Felix Honecker. The phrase reeked of cannibalism. Papa plainly felt that Frank was a chunk of the old man's magic meat. Chapter 39. Fata Morgana. A little more light was shed by another essay in the supplement, a florid essay titled, What San Lorenzo Has Met to One American. It was almost certainly ghost-written. It was signed by Major General Franklin Honecker. In the essay, Frank told of being all alone on a nearly swamped 68-foot Chris craft in the Caribbean. He didn't explain what he was doing on it or how he happened to be alone. He did indicate, though, that his point of departure had been Cuba. The luxurious pleasure craft was going down, and my meaningless life with it, said the essay. All I'd eaten for 4 days was 2 biscuits and a seagull. The dorsal fins of man-eating sharks were cleaving the warm seas around me, and needle-teethed barracuda were making those waters boil. I raised my eyes to my Maker, willing to accept whatever his decision might be, and my eyes alit on a glorious mountain peak above the clouds. Was this Fata Morgana? The cruel deception of a mirage? I looked up Fata Morgana at this point in my reading, learning that it was, in fact, a mirage named after Morgan Le Fay, a fairy who lived at the bottom of a lake. It was famous for appearing in the Strait of Messina, between Calabria and Sicily. Fata Morgana was poetic crap, in short. When Frank saw from his sinking pleasure craft was not cruel Fata Morgana, but the peak of Mount McCabe. Gentle seas then nestled Frank's pleasure craft to the rocky shores of San Lorenzo, as though God wanted him to go there. Frank stepped ashore, dry-shod, and asked where he was. The essay didn't say so, but the son of a bitch had a piece of Ice 9 with him, and a thermos jug. Frank, having no passport, was put in jail in the capital city of Bolivar. He was visited there by Papa Manzano, who wanted to know if it were possible that Frank was a blood relative of the immortal Dr. Felix Honecker. I admitted I was, said Frank in the essay. Since that moment, every door to opportunity in San Lorenzo has been opened wide to me. Chapter 40. House of Hope and Mercy. As it happened, as it was supposed to happen, Bocanon would say, I was assigned by a magazine to do a story in San Lorenzo. The story wasn't to be about Papa Manzano or Frank. It was about Julian Castle, an American sugar millionaire who had, at the age of 40, followed the example of Dr. Albert Schweitzer by founding a free hospital in a jungle, by devoting his life to miserable folk of another race. Castle's hospital was called the House of Hope and Mercy in the jungle. Its jungle was on San Lorenzo, among the wild coffee trees on the northern slope of Mount McCabe. When I flew to San Lorenzo, Julian Castle was 60 years old. It had been absolutely unselfish for 20 years. He had been absolutely selfish for 20 years. In his selfish days, he had been as familiar to tabloid readers as Tommy Manville, Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, and Barbara Hutton. His fame had rested on lechery, alcoholism, reckless driving, and draft evasion. He had a dazzling talent for spending millions without increasing mankind's stores of anything but chagrin. He had been married 5 times, had produced 1 son. The one son, Philip Castle, was the manager and owner of the hotel at which I planned to stay. The hotel was called the Casa Mona. It was named after Mona Ammons Manzano, the blonde Negro on the cover of the supplement to the New York Sunday Times. The Casa Mona was brand new. It was one of the 3 new buildings in the background of the supplement's portrait of Mona. While I didn't feel that purposeful seas were wafting me to San Lorenzo, I did feel that love was doing the job. The Fata Morgana, the mirage of what it would be like to be loved by Mona Ammons Manzano, had become a tremendous force in my meaningless life. I imagined that she could make me far happier than any woman had so far succeeded in doing. Chapter 41. A Caress Built for Two. The seating on the airplane, bound for San Lorenzo from Miami, was 3 and 3. As it happened, as it was supposed to happen, my seatmates were Horlick Minton of the new American ambassador to the Republic of San Lorenzo, and his wife, Claire. They were white-haired, gentle, and frail. Minton told me that he was a career diplomat, holding the rank of ambassador for the first time. He and his wife had so far served, he told me, in Bolivia, Chile, Japan, France, Yugoslavia, Egypt, the Union of South Africa, Liberia, and Pakistan. They were lovebirds. They entertained each other endlessly with little gifts, sights worth seeing out the plane window, amusing or instructive bits from things they read, random recollections of times gone by. They were, I think, a flawless example of what Bokanon calls a duprass, which is a caress composed of only 2 persons. A true duprass, Bokanon tells us, can't be invaded, not even by children born of such a union. I exclude the Mittens, therefore, from my own caress, from Frank's caress, from Newt's caress, from Asa Breed's caress, from Angela's caress, from Lyman Enders Knowles' caress, from Sherman Krebs' caress. The Mittens' caress was a tidy one, composed of only 2. I should think you'd be very pleased, I said to Minton. What should I be pleased about? Pleased to have the rank of ambassador. From the pitying way Minton and his wife looked at each other, I gathered that I had said a fat-headed thing. But they humored me. Yes, winced Minton. I'm very pleased. He smiled wanly. I'm deeply honored. And so it went with almost every subject I brought up. I couldn't make the Mittens bubble about anything. For instance, I suppose you can speak a lot of languages, I said. No, about 6 or 7, between us, said Minton. That must be very gratifying. What must? Being able to speak to people of so many different nationalities. Very gratifying, said Minton emptily. Very gratifying, said his wife. And they went back to reading a fat, typewritten manuscript that was spread across the chair arm between them. Tell me, I said a little later, in all your wide travels, have you found people everywhere about the same at heart? Said Minton. Do you find people to be about the same at heart, wherever you go? He looked at his wife, making sure she had heard the question, then turned back to me. About the same, wherever you go, he agreed. I said. Bokanon tells us, incidentally, that members of a Duprass always die within a week of each other. When it came for the Mittens to die, they did it within the same second. Chapter 42. Bicycles for Afghanistan. There was a small saloon in the rear of the plane, and I repaired there for a drink. It was there that I met another fellow American, H. Lowe Crosby of Evanston, Illinois, and his wife, Hazel. They were heavy people in their 50s. They spoke twangingly. Crosby told me that he owned a bicycle factory in Chicago, that he had nothing but ingratitude from his employees. He was going to move his business to grateful San Lorenzo. You know San Lorenzo well? I asked. This'll be the first time I ever see you, but everything I've heard about it I like, said H. Lowe Crosby. They've got discipline. They got something you could count on from one year to the next. They don't have the kind of government encouraging everybody to be the same kind of original pissant nobody ever heard of before. Sir? Christ. Back in Chicago, we don't make bicycles anymore. It's all human relations now. The eggheads sit around trying to figure out new ways for everybody to be happy. Nobody can get fired, no matter what. And if somebody does accidentally make a bicycle, the union accuses us of cruel and inhuman practices, and the government confiscates the bicycle for back taxes and gives it to a blind man in Afghanistan. And you think things will be better in San Lorenzo? I know damn well they will be. The people down there are poor enough and scared enough and ignorant enough to have some common sense. Crosby asked me what my name was and what my business was. I told him, and his wife Hazel recognized my name as an Indiana name. She was from Indiana, too. My God, she said. Are you a Hoosier? I admitted I was. I'm a Hoosier, too, she crowed. Nobody has to be ashamed of being a Hoosier. I'm not, I said. I never knew anybody who was. Hoosiers do all right. Lowe and I've been around the world twice, and everywhere we went, we found Hoosiers in charge of everything. That's reassuring. You know, the manager of that new hotel in Istanbul? No. He's a Hoosier. And the military, whatever he is in Tokyo? Attaché, said her husband. He's a Hoosier, said Hazel. And the new ambassador to Yugoslavia? A Hoosier? I asked. Not only him, but the Hollywood editor of Life magazine, too. And that man in Chile? A Hoosier, too. You can't go anywhere without a Hoosier that hasn't made his mark, she said. The man who wrote Ben-Hur was a Hoosier. And James Whitcomb Riley. Are you from Indiana, too? I asked her husband. No, I'm a prairie stater. Land of Lincoln, as they say. And as far as that goes, said Hazel triumphantly, Lincoln was a Hoosier, too. He grew up in Spencer County. Sure, I said. I don't know what it is about Hoosiers, said Hazel. But they've sure got something. If somebody was to make a list, they'd be amazed. That's true, I said. She grasped me firmly by the arm. We Hoosiers have got to stick together. Right. You can call me Mom. What? Whenever I meet a young Hoosier, I tell them, you can call me Mom. Uh-huh. Let me hear you say it, she urged. Mom? She smiled and let go of my arm. Some piece of clockwork had completed its cycle. My calling Hazel Mom had shut it off, and now Hazel was rewinding it for the next Hoosier to come along. Hazel's obsession with Hoosiers around the world was a textbook example of a false cuirass, of a seeming team that was meaningless in terms of the ways God gets things done. A textbook example of what Bokanon calls a grand falloon. Other examples of grand falloons are the Communist Party, the Daughters of the American Revolution, the General Electric Company, the International Order of Odd Fellows, and any nation, anytime, anywhere. As Bokanon invites us to sing along with him, if you wish to study a grand falloon, just remove the skin of a toy balloon. Chapter 43, The Demonstrator. H. Lowe Crosby was of the opinion that dictatorships were often very good things. He wasn't a terrible person, and he wasn't a fool. It suited him to confront the world with a certain barnyard clownishness, but many of the things he had to say about undisciplined mankind were not only funny, but true. The major point at which his reason and his sense of humor left him was when he approached the question of what people were really supposed to do with their time on Earth. He believed firmly that they were meant to build bicycles for him. I hope San Lorenzo is every bit as good as you've heard it is, I said. I only have to talk to one man to find out if it is or not. He said, when Papa Manzano gives his word of honor about anything on that little island, that's it. That's how it is. That's how it'll be. The thing I like, said Hazel, is they all speak English and they're all Christians. That makes things so much easier. You know how they deal with crime down there? Crosby asked me. Nope. They just don't have any crime down there. Papa Manzano's made crime so damn unattractive, nobody even thinks about it without getting sick. I heard you can lay a billfold in the middle of a sidewalk, and you could come back a week later, and it'll be right there, with everything still in it. You know what the punishment is for stealing something? No. The hook, he said. No fines, no probation, no 30 days in jail. It's the hook. The hook for stealing, for murder, for arson, for treason, for rape, for being a peeping Tom. Break a law, any damn law at all, and it's the hook. Everybody can understand that. And San Lorenzo is the best behaved country in the world. What is the hook? They put up a gallows, see? 2 posts and a crossbeam. And then they take a big kind of iron fishing hook and they hang it down from the crossbeam. Then they take somebody who's dumb enough to break the law and put the point of the hook in through one side of his belly and out the other, and they let him go. And there he hangs, by God. One damn sorry lawbreaker. Good God. I don't say it's good, said Crosby, but I don't say it's bad either. I sometimes wonder if something like that wouldn't clear up juvenile delinquency. Maybe the hook's a little extreme for a democracy. Public hanging's more like it. Stir up a few teenage car thieves on lampposts in front of their houses with signs around their necks saying, "Mama, here's your boy." Do that a few times and I think ignition locks would go the way of the rumble seat and the running board. "We saw that thing in the basement of the waxworks in London," said Hazel. "What thing?" I asked her. "The hook. Down in the Chamber of Horrors in the basement. They had a wax person hanging from the hook. It looked so real. I wanted to throw up." "Harry Truman didn't look anything like Harry Truman," said Crosby. "Pardon me?" "In the waxworks," said Crosby. "The statue of Truman didn't really look like him." "Most of them did, though," said Hazel. "Was it anybody in particular hanging from the hook?" I asked. "I don't think so. It was just somebody." "Just a demonstrator?" I asked. "Yeah. There was a black velvet curtain in front of it, and you had to pull the curtain back to see. And there was a note pinned to the curtain that said children weren't supposed to look." "But kids did," said Crosby. "There were kids down there, and they all looked." "A sign like that is just catnip to kids," said Hazel. "How did the kids react when they saw the person on the hook?" I asked. "Oh," said Hazel, "they reacted just about the same way the grown-ups did. They just looked at it and didn't say anything. Just moved on to see what the next thing was." "What was the next thing?" "It was an iron chair a man had been roasted alive in," said Crosby. "He was roasted for murdering his son." "Only after they roasted him," Hazel recalled blandly, "they found out he hadn't murdered his son after all." Chapter 44. Communist Sympathizers. When I again took my seat beside the Dupras of Claire and Horlick Mitten, I had some new information about them. I got it from the Crosbys. The Crosbys didn't know Mitten, but they knew his reputation. They were indignant about his appointment as ambassador. They told me that Mitten had once been fired by the State Department for his softness towards communism. And the communist dupes, or worse, had him reinstated. "Very pleasant little saloon back there," I said to Mitten as I sat down. He and his wife were still reading the manuscript that lay between them. "Nice bar back there." "Good, I'm glad." The two read on, apparently uninterested in talking to me. And then Mitten turned to me suddenly with a bittersweet smile, and he demanded, "Who was he, anyway?" "Who was who?" "The man you were talking to in the bar. We went back there for a drink, and when we were just outside, we heard you and a man talking. The man was talking very loudly. He said I was a communist sympathizer." "A bicycle manufacturer named H. Lowe Crosby," I said. I felt myself reddening. I was fired for pessimism. Communism had nothing to do with it. "I got him fired," said his wife. The only piece of real evidence produced against him was a letter I wrote to the New York Times from Pakistan. What did it say? It said a lot of things, she said, because I was very upset about how Americans couldn't imagine what it was like to be something else and proud of it. I see. But there was one sentence they kept coming back to again and again in the loyalty hearing. Americans, he said, quoting his wife's letter to the Times, are forever searching for love in forms it never takes, in places it can never be. It must have something to do with the vanished frontier. Chapter 45. Why Americans Are Hated. Claire Mitten's letter to the Times was published during the worst era of Senator McCarthy, and her husband was fired 12 hours after the letter was printed. What was so awful about the letter? I asked. The highest possible form of treason, said Mitten, is to say that Americans aren't loved wherever they go, whatever they do. Claire tried to make the point that American foreign policy should recognize hate rather than imagine love. I guess Americans are hated a lot of places. People are hated a lot of places. Claire pointed out in her letter that Americans, in being hated, were simply paying the normal penalty for being people, and that they were foolish to think they should somehow be exempted from that penalty. But the loyalty board didn't pay any attention to that. All they knew was that Claire and I both felt that Americans were unloved. Well, I'm glad the story had a happy ending. Said Mitten. It finally came out all right, I said. Here you are on your way to an embassy all on your own. Mitten and his wife exchanged another of those pitying, depressed glances. Then Mitten said to me, Yes, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is ours. Chapter 46. The Bokanonist Method for Handling Caesar. I talked to the Mittens about the legal status of Franklin Honecker, who was, after all, not only a big shot in Papa Manzano's government, but a fugitive of the United States Justice. That's all been written off, said Mitten. He isn't a United States citizen anymore, and he seems to be doing good things where he is, so that's that. He gave up his citizenship? Anyone who declares allegiance to a foreign state or serves in its armed forces or accepts employment in its government loses his citizenship. Read your passport. You can't lead this sort of funny paper international romance that Frank has led and still have Uncle Sam for a mother chicken. Is he well liked in San Lorenzo? Mitten weighed in his hands the manuscript he and his wife had been reading. I don't know yet. This book says not. What book is that? It's the only scholarly book ever written about San Lorenzo. Sort of scholarly, echoed Mitten. It hasn't been published yet. This is one of 5 copies. He handed it to me, inviting me to read as much as I liked. I opened the book to its title page and found the name of the book was San Lorenzo, the land, the history, the people. The author was Philip Castle, the son of Julian Castle, the hotel-keeping son of the great altruist I was on my way to see. I let the book fall open where it would. As it happened, it fell open to the chapter about the island's outlawed holy man, Bokanon. There was a quotation from the books of Bokanon on the page before me. Those words leapt from the page and into my mind, and they were welcomed there. The words were a paraphrase of the suggestion by Jesus, "Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's." Bokanon's paraphrase was this: "Pay no attention to Caesar. Caesar doesn't have the slightest idea what's really going on." Chapter 47. Dynamic Tension. I became so absorbed in Philip Castle's book that I didn't even look up from it when we put down for 10 minutes in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I didn't even look up when somebody behind me whispered, thrilled, that a midget had come aboard. A little while later, I looked around for the midget, but could not see him. I did see, right in front of Hazel and H. Lou Crosby, a horse-faced woman with platinum blonde hair, a woman new to the passenger list. Next to hers was a seat that appeared to be empty, a seat that might well have sheltered a midget without my seeing even the top of his head. But it was San Lorenzo, the land, the history, the people that intrigued me then. So I looked no harder for the midget. Midgets are, after all, diversions for silly or quiet times. And I was serious and excited about Bokanon's theory of what he called dynamic tension, his sense of a priceless equilibrium between good and evil. When I first saw the term dynamic tension in Philip Castle's book, I laughed what I imagined to be a superior laugh. The term was a favorite of Bokanon's, according to young Castle's book, and I supposed that I knew something that Bokanon didn't know, that the term was one vulgarized by Charles Atlas, a mail-order muscle builder. As I learned when I read on, briefly, Bokanon knew exactly who Charles Atlas was. Bokanon was, in fact, an alumnus of his muscle-building school. It was the belief of Charles Atlas that muscles could be built without barbells or spring exercisers, could be built by simply putting one set of muscles against another. It was the belief of Bokanon that good societies could be built only by pitting good against evil, and by keeping the tension between the two high at all times. And in Castle's book, I read my first Bokanonist poem, or Calypso. It went like this: "Papa Manzano, he's so very bad, but without bad Papa, I would be sad. Because without Papa's badness, tell me if you would, how could wicked old Bokanon ever look good?"